Out of all of my teachers in high school, I probably want to give the biggest shout out to Miss E for being my #1 fan throughout these past 2 years and helping me with everything, the college processes, and just making sure that she's there for me all the time.
I want to give a shout out to Ms. Gatal because she's the best teacher at our school and she's inspired me to work really hard and always try to push myself to learn new things. And I've learned that like when I struggle, then I can learn a lot. And I also want to shout out to Miss E because she makes the classroom interesting.
Hi, I would like to give a shout out to Ms. Voss and Mr. Henniger.
Shout out to Nick Sensei.
I want to give a shout out to Mr. Dyer for helping me during my high school year.
I want to shout out to Ms. Gatal, Mr. Yasmin for challenging me with math and inspiring me to be a math teacher later on in my career. I also want to shout out to Miss Frank and Miss Cabela who put up so much with a lot of recommendation letter they wrote for me. Thank you a lot.
So I want to shout out to Mr. Giannini, Mr. G, as he instilled confidence in me from sophomore year as I was a new student coming to the school, and he definitely was the person I could talk my problems to. And shout out to Mr. Ecker, who has the most amazing curriculum and one of the best teachers I had at Silver Creek.
I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Alvarez, my Spanish teacher. Even though he doesn't teach at this school anymore, I feel like he instilled certain values in me that will help me throughout my life and college.
I would like to have a big shout out to Ms. Gatal, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Golo for they helped me a lot and become like confident, and I also want to say thanks to all my teachers I had for 4 years because I wouldn't be here without them.
And I want to shout out Mr. Cervantes and Mr. Nasman with Mr. Seal because they have taught me a lot of the life lesson instead of just the lessons in the book. So I would like to thank you them and the other teacher that helped me out throughout those years. Thank you.
I would like to thank Ms. Gatal, Ms. Madrigal, and Ms. Weck for all they've done for me. They do so much for their students and they've really touched me over these few years.
Shout out to Miss Shepard and Miss Nguyen.
Okay, so I want to give a really big shout out to Ms. King. She's been my teacher for 3 years, once for English and twice for yearbook. She's been there throughout my whole high school career, so I just really want to say thank you, Ms. King, for shaping me to be who I am today.
I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Henniger.
Shout out to Miss Yee and Mr. Henniger.
Shoutouts, I'd like to shout out to Mrs. Seal. She was the first teacher I connected to when I came to Creek, and she's such a supportive leadership teacher. I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Chan. He helped me to appreciate other cultures and he made me a better writer. I'd like to shout out Mr. Mendoza and Miss Tran for being such supportive Science Olympiad advisors. Miss Sanchez for really helping me in the college application process and supporting me and encouraging me to aim high. And most of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Mrs. Gutal. She's like a mother to me here at Silver Creek, and she's so supportive and loving. Not only did she help me to become better at math, but she really helped me in a lot of other things as well, and she's such a kind lady.
University. And I would like to give a big shout out to Mr. Henniger. He made me really enjoy taking his AP Human Geography class.
Thank you to all of my teachers who have helped me all throughout the 4 years I've been in Silver Creek. And thank you especially to Miss King, the best yearbook teacher ever.
And we'd like to give a shout out to Miss Wessels
For letting us eat food all the time.
I would like to give a shout out to all my performing arts teachers for helping me get out of my comfort zone and for helping me find my identity as an artist.
I would like to shout out to Mr. Seal, who wrote most of my teachers' recommendations and who helped motivate me to major in computer science.
I would like to just give a quick shout out to Mr. Taylor for being a great CSF advisor and a great English teacher throughout all of my years.
Shout out to Mr. Taylor, Mrs. Gutal, and Nick Sensei for writing me a recommendation letter.
To Mr. Cervantes and Miss Nuri for always welcoming me with open arms.
Shout out to Mr. Halonen for teaching me many life lessons.
Give a quick shout out to Mr. Curran for being the realest teacher ever, Senora Cuevas and Mrs. Vincula for being like the best teachers ever.
I want to shout out Miss Seal for always taking care of her kids, and shout out to Mr. Henniger for always making me laugh.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Henninger and Mr. Murphy for making me hate school less and always making me laugh.
And shout out to Miss Williams for always making psychology a fun place to learn.
I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to Mr. Henniger, Ms. Williams, and Ms. Weck. You guys have helped me make the most out of my senior year, and I wouldn't have been the person I am without you guys.
Shout out to Miss Wessels for always thinking the best of her students, Miss Catal for working so hard, and to Miss Morrow and Mr. Yasmin for just being great teachers.
I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Voss for being such a great English and philosophy teacher.
I'd like to give a shout out to all of my teachers who have believed in me and got me this far.
I'd like to thank all my teachers, past and present, especially Miss Voss, Miss Catal, and Mr. Henninger for opening doors and opportunities that have helped me foster my love for learning.
I would like to give a big shout out to Mr. Ecker and Mr. Espino for really helping me through college applications and for always giving me the guidance and advice that I needed to push through. Thank you for always believing me. I also like to thank Mr. Chan and Mr. Henninger for not only being one of the nicest and down-to-earth teacher, but allowing me the opportunity to be one of their students. And my last thank you is for Miss Catal for her time and dedication she has for her class.
I'd just like to give a shout out to Miss Catal and Miss Ure.
I would like to shout out Miss Catal, Mr. Head, Nick Sensei, Miss Morrow, Miss Summers.
I would like to shout out Mrs. Seal, Mrs. Wekesser, Mr. Floro, Mr. Mendoza, Mr. Henniger, and Miss Nguyen.
And I want to shout out Miss Byers for teaching me telephoto.
I'd like to shout out to Miss Newray and Mr. Murphy, great teachers.
Okay, so I'd like to give a shout out to Miss King, Mr. Nyasmin, Miss Catal, Mr. Henninger, and Miss Wessels.
I would like to give a shout out to Miss Nguyen. She's very hardworking and she puts a lot of care into her student.
I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Seal, Mr. Marr, and Miss Weck. I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Chan and Mr. Marr and Mr. Henniger for being the best teachers on campus.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Seal, Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen.
I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Ecker, Mr. Cardo, and Mr. Chen.
I would like to give a shout out to Miss Nguyen and Miss Morrow.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Taylor.
I want to give a shout out to Mr. Gazenka for teaching our math class and teaching us everything else besides math, keeping the class fun.
I would like to give a shout out to Miss Seal for being an amazing activities director these past 4 years. The leadership program would not be the same without you. And I would also like to give a quick shout out to Mr. Mock for not only helping me grow as a player, but also as a person. So thank you. I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Mock, Mr. Floral, and Mr. Ecker.
I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Ecker.
I'd like to give a shout out to Mrs. Voss for keeping the class very fun and dynamic, and Mrs. Catal for giving me a very challenging class to go through.
Shout out to Mr. Henninger for being the most caring teacher at Silver Creek, and Mr. Floro for making crafts the best class ever.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Mock and Mr. Flores for being amazing coaches and making school life fun.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. James for being a great PE teacher and Mr. Mock for being there for me during my high school career.
I'd like to thank Nick Sensei for being an awesome teacher. 本当にありがとうございます。
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Mock and Mr. Vu for guiding me in badminton and school.
Alright, shout out to Miss Fred and Miss Khan for helping me so much.
I want to give a shout out to Mr. Ka for being a great teacher.
I want to shout out Miss Wekesser, Miss Madrigal, and Mr. Ecker for helping me over the past couple years and pushing me to be a better student.
I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Catal for dealing with me even if I didn't know my calculus AB.
Shout out to Mr. Henninger and Miss Seal for always being positive influences on me.
Shout out to Miss Voss and Mr. Henniger for always being positive and teaching me a lot in school and out of school. I would like to shout out Miss Seal, Mr. Marr, Mr. Henniger, Mr. Floral, and Miss Catal for pushing me so hard throughout these years. Thank you. So I would like to shout out Mr. Floral, Mr. Henniger, Miss Weck, Miss Seal, Miss Catal. Thank you guys for pushing me and for making me a better person throughout my time here at high school. Thank you.
I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. Taylor, Miss Shepard, and Mr. Youngblood. Thank you for your help and support this year.
I'd like to shout out Miss Catal. She actually made me do work. She's the best teacher on campus, I think.
And I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Cargill for being an amazing Interact advisor.
Shout out to Miss Catal for challenging me every day of school.
Shout out to Mrs. Catal, Nick Sensei, and Miss Nguyen for helping me throughout all these years.
Shout out to Mr. Mott. You know why.
Shout out to Miss Catal for always believing in me.
I want to give a huge shout out to all my teachers, especially Mr. Sandoval and Mr. Ecker for pushing me to reach my full potential.
I want to give a big shout out to all my teachers. Special shout out to Nick Sensei for making the class a friendly atmosphere to hang out in and learn. Arigato, Nick Sensei.
I want to give a big shout out to all my teachers over the past 4 years in high school, especially the two teachers, Mr. Kern and Mr. Floral, for teaching me about history, crafts, and basically helping me become a better person.
I'd like to give a big shout out to all my teachers, especially Miss Nuri, since she's making me like English more.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Nasman and Mr. Ecker for pushing me to work hard, but also to have fun. I'd like to give a special shout out to Mr. Cervantes and Ms. Goutal for helping me do my toughest classes.
I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Nguyen and Mrs. Voss because I love them.
I'd like to give a shout out to Ms. Cargill for being an amazing Interact advisor.
I want to give a shout out to Mr. Chan, Mr. Henniger, and Ms. Goutal.
I want to thank all my teachers for supporting me throughout my 4 years of high school, but there are 2 teachers in particular who I really want to thank. I want to thank Ms. Goutal for challenging me to improve my calculus skills, and also to Mr. Ho, who has helped me through Key Club and also preparation for college.
I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Weck, Miss Weck, Miss Wessels, Mr. Nyasmin, Mr. Ecker, Mr. Espino, Ms. Perez, Ms. Cuevas, and above all, Mr. Laguna.
I would like to give a shout out to Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Myros, and Mr. Curran.
Out of all the amazing teachers I had throughout my 4 years, I just want to give a special shout out to Miss Seal for always being there whenever I needed her and to help me grow as a leader and as an individual.
I want to shout out Miss Nguyen, my math teacher for all my high school years, and Mr. Flores.
I want to give a shout out to Miss Verna because she helped me to discover what my favorite subject is, biology.
I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Nguyen, my calculus teacher, and my mom.
Shout out to Silver Creek High School and all the teachers and staff here, and for giving the opportunity to all the students and supporting them.